Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing. In the first topic, we are going to examine the prevailing economic vulnerabilities in the international market and its impact on the female workforce and the global best practices in this regard which can be adopted by our country. Then, in the second topic, we are going to analyze the issues which prevails in India's energy sector and what are the steps which the government has taken to greenify our energy sector. Then, from your simplified section, we'll take up 5 news where we'll not only try to simplify the news for you but also provide you the much important value addition keeping in mind the approaching Prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. The lead editorial today highlights the impact of the growing economic uncertainties on the female economic empowerment in our country and the reforms which shall be taken in this regard. The argument, which forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the larger theme of issues which are significantly impacting the women development. So the article, first and foremost, emphasizes that how with a nominal GDP which is worth of $4.19 trillion, our country has become the 4th largest economy in the world. And as the budget 2025 estimates that our country's nominal GDP is going to grow by 6.45% this year, our country is well en route to become the 3rd largest economy in the world, just behind USA and China. However, in the second line of the argument, the article suggests that this particular momentum which was gained by Indian economy is going to face formidable disruption. First and foremost in the form of the kind of the tariffs which are being imposed by the USA. The 50% tariffs on the Indian product which is going to be implemented by today itself. The idea is that by imposition of these tariffs on Indian product, the Indian products are going to become expensive in the US market and thus that will render our products non-competitive. Thus, if the demand for our Indian product is actually going to decline in the US market, don't you think that will basically disincentivize the Indian industries to produce? And thus, this particular tariff imposition has kind of a huge potential to impact $40 billion of our trade and has a potential to cut down our gross domestic production by almost 1%. As this tariff imposition is going to significantly impact our labor intensive sectors such as, for example, apparel, textile, gym and jewelry. 55% of the Indian exports will now be rendered incompetitive in compared to our neighboring countries like, for example, Vietnam and Bangladesh. Just look at the exports which we do from these labor intensive sector to US, amounting to billions of dollars from textiles, diamonds, gold and jewelry, machine and mechanical appliances, steel, aluminum and copper, various kind of organic chemicals and various small, micro and medium enterprises which constitutes the sectors like handicrafts, carpets, leather and footwear. Thus, all of this economic vulnerability of India which we are facing currently actually stems from the fact that the kind of a huge economic dependence which we had developed with US, considering it was a major export destination for our Indian products. For example, USA accounts for almost 18% of India's total export. And our export with USA had grown by 7% of compounded annual growth rate between the year of 2020 to 2025. Now, in this particular context, if we put the gender lens and we start looking at the economy, which basically comprises of the female participation in this, so the female constitutes 48% of our country's population. And their contribution in our economy is 18% of India's GDP. So the article argues that how, as it is going to impact such labor intensive sector, specifically the small, micro and medium enterprises, it is also going to significantly dent the female labor force participation rate. If we refer to the Economic Survey of 2025, the female labor force participation rate or FLFPR stood at around 41% versus 60% in China. So let's say for example there are 100 women who are actually entering into the workforce. 41% of them are actually eventually getting employed, which is obviously less first of all in comparison to China. And the article suggests that this economic vulnerability is further going to dent this female labor force participation rate. Also, if we refer to the Udyam portal, the women shares in the MSME employee was already low at 18%, and the women owned MSMEs were only 1 by 5th or 20% of the total MSMEs. So these two particular sectors are also going to be impacted by this tariff imposition which has been done. The major reason for that is the kind of disincentivization of the industries which is taking place, and that will lead to the closure of them. The closure of these industries or job layoffs which these industries will eventually apply, that will kind of significantly or will have direct impact on the female labor force participation rate. For example, look at the headings of today's newspapers itself. After US has notified the additional tariff, textile units in Tirupur, Noida and Surat, they have already halted their production. The steep US tariffs has a huge kind of potential to actually hit our country's production linked incentive scheme. That will actually further deepen down the private capital expenditure slowdown which was already taking place. So with such huge impact on female labor force participation rate, the idea is what is the current status of women in the labor force and why there lies such huge underrepresentation. So the editorial suggests that India now risks having the same fate as various southern economies like for example Italy and Greece, where the low female labor force participation rate actually led to a kind of a long-term decay on their economies. So the first and foremost, the reason which we face when it comes to, for example, a woman and a woman wants to actually work in the labor force, want to significantly contribute to India's economy. The problem which they face is it starts stemming from their birth itself with the first social issue, and that is the son meta syndrome. The son meta syndrome basically implies that male are basically considered as the heir of the next generation, or for example to carry the legacy of the family forward. The point is, because of this particular kind of a social stereotype or taboo which still prevails in our society, that translates into sex selective kind of abortion which takes place or sex selective birth, leading to high cases of female infanticide. For example, if we refer to the National Family Health Survey 5's data, the sex ratio in Haryana was as skewed as 893 girl child being born per 1000 male child. Just look at the newspaper headings like this. India loses 3 million girls in infanticide in a decade. So this is not an issue of a past, but a kind of a prevailing reality. Now, this particular issue of sex selective birth which is taking place, that also kind of implies the poor care which is basically being directed to the nutrition of the woman, or for example the maternal health care. So for example, look at the kind of the low institutional delivery of child in our country. As per the Janani Suraksha Yojana, which is a government scheme, that itself implies that the total coverage in our country was only 36%. Or for example, if you refer to the nutrition of the woman, refer to the National Family Health Survey 5 data, 57% of the women aged between 15 to 49 years in our country are basically anemic. Anemic basically means that they contains low level of iron in their blood and thus they have low oxygen carrying capacity, which basically hinders their learning capability, their working capacity, basically hinders their kind of child carriage capacity as well. Or for example, even when they are giving birth, look at the high maternal mortality rate which our country has. 93 women dies giving birth to 1 lakh live birth. Let's say for example, somehow this girl child survived under Beti Bachao Beti Padhao initiative and somehow got educated. The idea is under the provision, let's say for example, Right to Education Act 2009, which basically provides for free education, at least from the age of 6 to 14 years. Even after that, there exists the poor translation of this educated girl child into the workforce. And that is an issue which we term as STEM paradox, or science, technology, engineering and medicinal field paradox. So for example, when it comes to graduates, 43% of the STEM graduates are actually female in our country. However, when it kind of translates to the workforce, that is only 27% of STEM workforce is comprised by women. This is termed as STEM paradox. And this STEM paradox basically takes the shape from the kind of a prevailing patriarchal norms which prevails in our country, where it basically leads to undermining of the capacity of women to actually work and become financially independent. For example, the association of women with pink jobs like teachers and doctors. How many of you have actually seen some truck driver in our country? Or for example, even when we are walking across the street and we see there is a woman who is driving, let's say for example, an auto rickshaw, everyone start turning and looking at the particular woman as if they have seen dinosaurs in today's time. Second, the glass ceiling effect which takes place. So this kind of distrust on a woman to actually work efficiently at a higher administrative role actually leads to poor translation of the women who are working at the grassroots level to actually reach at the top administrative posts in our country. There is a historical precedence of that. There is a particular text called as Tabaqat-e-Nasiri, which was written by a person named as Minhas-e-Siraz. Minhas-e-Siraz basically wrote that how the first and the only woman Delhi Sultan, who was Razia, who ruled from the year of 1236 to 1240, succeeding her father Iltutmish. So he basically writes that how Razia Sultan had all the capabilities to become a great ruler or a great administrator, but there was one major fault, that she was born in a wrong gender. Now some of you will argue that, sir, this is a thing of medieval past. All of this doesn't take place now. So let's refer to the data by Department of Personnel and Training, according to which only 18% of IAS officers in our country are actually women. Or for example, let's refer to the Global Gender Gap Report of 2025, which was recently published by World Economic Forum, where India ranked abysmally low at 131. We basically ranked behind countries like, for example, Sri Lanka, Bhutan and Nepal. According to which the female representation in the parliament, that is basically the highest legislative body of our country, actually declined to only being 13.8%. The idea is that if the women are not reaching at these decision making places, how they will actually make the policies which are actually gender sensitive. That is exactly what takes place when we look at the kind of the safety concerns these women are facing. For example, just look at this heading. India lodged average 86 rapes daily and 49 offenses against the women per hour in 2021. So by the time you guys will finish this lecture, there will be 49 women in our country as per the National Crime Record Bureau who might be facing some or other kind of discrimination, ostracization and some kind of misbehavior by obviously this patriarchal society. Or for example, the unreliable public transport which exists, or the lack of adequate sanitation which prevails. So for example, in your locality, just have a small tour and see how many toilets are actually male specific and what is the ratio or the number of female toilets in comparison to them. Why this is happening? Because if the women are not actually, reaching to that place at that administrative level to make such decisions, to bring such policies, then how they will actually bring the changes at the grassroots level? The major reason for all these issues is the imposition of a dual role syndrome, or that ultimately leads to time poverty. What is this dual role syndrome? The dual role syndrome is basically the association of women with the unpaid domestic care work. For example, if we refer to the World Bank's time use survey, these women, they basically perform this unpaid domestic care work 7 times more in comparison to a man. Just look at the data here provided to us by the World Bank itself. The women on average spend 4.1 hours per day on this unpaid care and domestic work. The women's unpaid contribution to healthcare equates to almost 2.3% of the global GDP. When women's contribution to all type of care is considered, this figure actually raises to almost $11 trillion or almost 2.5 times of our country's economy right now. The point is that if the woman is involved in this unpaid domestic care work for which she is not getting any kind of financial remuneration and thus kind of perpetually dependent on her male counterpart and thus not having any kind of financial independence, the point is that they basically lack the time for any kind of skill accumulation as well, thus rendering them kind of jobless or having a frictional unemployment in the industry 4.0, and that is the concept of time poverty which they faces. Also hindered by the digital illiteracy, which act as a kind of a barrier to the implementation of various government schemes. Let's say for example, if the literacy rate, we look at the women specifically, as per census 2011, the female literacy rate was 64%. The tribal woman was more illiterate, almost 49%. And that is basically also being further aggravated by the kind of digital divide which prevails in our country right now. As per a recent Hindu report, 54% schools have functional computer, 52% schools have internet connection, 46% of women in rural areas actually uses some kind of smartphone. When we are talking about the term gender, let's not only limit it to the perspective of women, but also talk about the transgender. And there exists a kind of a policy paralysis for them. So even if their right were recognized under the NALSA judgment of 2014 and under Transgender Protection Act of 2019, various, let's say for example, local bodies, authorities, state governments have not implemented their rights as it was Supreme Court's directive under NALSA versus Union of India 2014. So has government taken some steps in this regard to actually increase women participation in legislative forces, to actually increase, let's say for example, women's role in decision making power, to actually improve the healthcare status of women? For example, the Gender Budget 2025, there was 37% increase with fiscal allocation of 4.5 lakh crore. As per the 106th Constitutional Amendment Act, 33% reservation has been provided in Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly to the women to strengthen their women's participation in policy making. In the context of financial inclusion, the government is providing loans to women entrepreneurs under Stand Up India scheme. To further drive the rural development and poverty elevation, there is promotion of women-led self-help groups under National Rural Livelihood Mission. To reduce regional gender disparity, financial assistance is being provided to women farmers under state-specific schemes like, for example, Ladli Behan Yojana of Madhya Pradesh. And thus, the article suggests that all of this has actually led to increased representation of women, specifically in the rural area, a term which you guys might be hearing very often, and that is called as feminization of agricultural workforce. For example, 78% of India's employed women actually works in agriculture. 70% of farm work is led by women. 50% of rural women are actually agricultural laborers. So when we are talking about this increasing workforce of female in rural areas, what is the reality of that? If we refer to an article which was actually published by Oxfam, it suggests that how majority of these jobs are unpaid and low productivity female work in the family owned agricultural fields in the rural areas, which obviously translates to no kind of skill accumulation. So it's not like they are going to have some kind of financial remuneration which will be provided to them, or they will get financial independence to make decisions at the grassroots level, or for example any kind of skill accumulation with which they can get some good jobs in industry 4.0 or 5.0. Then there also prevails a huge earning gap, even if you are talking about this 50% agricultural laborers who are women. So for example, for the same work, if the male is getting paid 100 rupees, this earning gap exists almost as half as for women. So they get paid only 50 rupees for the very same kind of work. Then do they have any kind of financial independence in the terms of property rights? For example, there exists disparity in the ownership of land holdings in agriculture, which we can see from the National Agriculture Census 2015-16, according to which only 14% of land holding was under the ownership of female. Thus, all of this further is augmented by the policy blindness of the government. So there was another editorial which we are covering here in a small section today. The editorial in Indian Express talked about the kind of low financial inclusion which has taken place under Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, where the female beneficiaries only account to 15%. Or for example, the kind of financial incentives which is being provided to the farmers under Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, the female beneficiaries are only 25%, and a major reason for that is the kind of a land holding criteria which is applied, where the woman obviously does not have land to their name. So this argument that the female workforce is increasing in rural areas, it also has several discrepancies and several limitations. So what can be done as per the today's editorial? It suggests for certain lessons which we can adopt from abroad, the global best practices, as well as the certain solutions which has emerged from our home itself. So it gives us example of several countries, like for example Netherlands, which has created a kind of a flexible part-time work model, or Japan and China, who have invested in legal protection, care infrastructure, as well as skilling of the women. The government of India is also doing that under a particular scheme. Can anybody of you name that in the comment box? Then in Karnataka, there was a particular Shakti scheme which was launched to provide free public bus travel to women. A similar kind of initiative also took place in Delhi as well, the free bus rides to women. So as per the today's article, that actually translated to 40% surge which took place in ridership of women, thus providing them kind of high mobility for the work purposes, specifically from the rural areas, or for example peri-urban areas. Then various kind of tax incentives are being provided for female entrepreneurs, digital inclusion drives, and the formalization of gig workers which shall be done. In this regard, it basically suggests for the utilizing technology, and it gives example of urban company, right, a kind of a gig working platform, where it basically hired more than 15,000 women, and these women were basically skilled in various aspects of gig economy, so they could perform various kind of flexible work, even the work from home as well, and they were also provided several kind of benefits which were kind of attractive for these women to join at the first place. Like for example, they were being provided with accidental insurance, they were provided a kind of a safety security net. For example, maternity benefit was availed to them under the Maternity Benefit Act of 1971. Then it also suggests that how the state governments have also taken certain kind of innovative steps, like for example, Rajasthan's Indira Gandhi Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme, under which almost 4 crore working persons days were created, and almost 65% of this job was actually translated towards the women, where a kind of a flexible workspace was created for the women in their neighborhood itself, following the Kudumshri model of Kerala. In, let's say for example, various aspects of care economy, like for example creating creches near the working space of the woman, or for example employing this woman in urban afforestation drive using the Miyawaki method. So these are certain innovative steps which we can take to actually increase the female labor force participation rate, and that will act as a kind of a net to the increasing economic vulnerabilities which we are facing in the international market. So keep this discussion in your mind. When you are writing the conclusion, you can actually write about the McKinsey report, which actually suggests that how, if we are able to reduce this gender gap which prevails in our economy, India will be able to almost create further economic advantage of $770 billion by the year of 2025 itself. So keep all of these arguments in your mind, try to attempt this particular question and some of the PYQs on the line, and we move forward to the next topic, where the editorial in Indian Express compares the green energy push initiatives which has been taken by China and in contrast actually holds responsible the India's power sector, which is actually holding India of today and future, or basically kind of denting our economic growth, the kind of an ideal economic growth which we could have achieved, and thus also provide for the suggestions which shall be implemented. The argument which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of energy security. So the first argument which is made by the editorial today is that how China has emerged as the world's most successful electro state. So to put in context, in the year of 2024, China installed more solar and wind energy firms more than combined all the large economies of the world, like for example United States, Brazil, India, Germany, Japan, etc. So for example, if we refer to this particular report which has been provided to us by Statista, it tells us that how, if we look at in the year of 2024, the leading countries in the installed renewable energy capacity, China installed in the terms of gigawatt 1827 gigawatt of renewable energy. That is almost 4 times more than USA and almost 9 times more than India. So note down that India is currently 4th largest in the term of installed renewable energy capacity in the world. The major reason for that is the kind of monopoly which China holds over the production of critical earth elements which are essential for the creation of renewable energy, such as for example polysilicon or for example lithium, to actually create, let's say for example photovoltaic solar panels to create solar energy, or to create wind turbines, or various kind of lithium batteries on which electrical vehicles are run. That is one of the major issue which actually our country is facing, because we are hugely import dependent on such critical earth element, specifically from China. That also leads to the kind of huge trade deficit which we incur with China and the economic dependence which we have on the country. Thus, what was the initiatives which the China took in this regard? A kind of an early leap when it came to the renewable energy sector. So China came up with a policy called as Renewable Energy Law of 2005, under which the various state-owned enterprises, like for example National Development and Restructuring Commission or National Energy Authorities, and the various kind of public sector banks, first and foremost they identified the various important potential sites for creation of wind and solar farms, like for example in Gansu, Inner Mongolia, Jiangsu, etc. And then through the use of these state-owned enterprises and public sector banks, heavy collateral-free loans were provided to these firms' installation in these specific areas. China also basically utilized the national programs, for example Belt and Road Initiative, first and foremost to create huge infrastructure inroad within the hinterlands of the country, as well as kind of connecting it with the logistic supply chain for various kind of minerals with other countries as well. Further integration of funds and technology took place, and that led to the kind of government-backed renewable energy transition. For example, extraction of important raw materials like polysilicon, lithium, etc. To creation of hydropower stations in Africa, wind farms in Latin America to further diversify their energy basket, and ultimately creation of high voltage transmission lines in remote areas. Keep this particular point in your mind when we'll be discussing about the India's energy transmission, specifically in the larger rural hinterlands. That ultimately led to what? The important role of state-owned enterprises. So China majorly focused upon creation of the sunrise sector. So let's say for example creation of a particular distribution company. The distribution company will require what? Various transformers. So the companies to create these transformers, create these carbon fibers power grids. To create these carbon fiber power grids, various micro and small enterprises which were created around that. So that basically led to huge investments in the manufacturing sector, and that led to the creation of a large scale economy in China as well. That has basically kind of one of the major backbone of the China's economy. So for example, if you refer to the key report, it basically tells us that how in the year of 2024 itself, China invested only $940 billion in the renewable energy sector. In comparison to that, India's investment was $3.4 billion only. And thus, almost 55% of the global energy investment is actually coming from China, with integration of the national grids with various renewable energy power plants. And that is basically done with build at cost mentality. So all the redundant projects, they were basically kind of transitioned away from the economy, and various energy exchange agreements were signed. So for example, if you are producing so much of renewable energy, we also need a good consumer market to purchase that. That was one of the reasons to actually create these hydropower stations in Africa and wind farms in Latin America, the larger policy of the China's debt trap diplomacy. In comparison to that, let's refer to what is the status of India's energy sector. So if we refer to the report which was provided to us by the International Energy Agency, it says that the India's share of global energy demand is actually going to rise 9% by the year of 2035. The coal will obviously going to remain the dominant fuel produced in India with 65% share of total production in 2035. Renewables overtake oil as the second largest, increasing from 4% to almost 14% in 2035. Look at the share in primary energy consumption. As of 2035, what it is going to be. 26% will come from China, 13% from US, and India will become the third largest energy consumption country in the world. Currently, as per the Center for Electricity Authority, the total installed power capacity which our country has as in the month of June 2025, that is 476 gigawatt. Of which the non-fossil fuel production of energy, for example coming from solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, or for example from your nuclear energy that contributes to 8.8 gigawatt specifically, 235 gigawatt or 49% of total installed capacity actually comes from non-fossil fuel. The idea is that through this, almost the per capita electricity consumption has actually increased by 45% between the year of 2011 to 2025. Thus, en route to this increasing energy consumption with increasing population, digitalization, large scale use of various kind of machine made products, the idea is 28 million households has been electrified, and 100% village electrification under Saubhagya scheme of the government was achieved by the year of 2018. However, there are several prevailing issues in our energy sector which actually undermines our economy's growth in comparison to China as per today's editorial. The first and foremost is, it suggests or basically argues that how electricity pricing actually imposes almost 100% tax on the manufacturing of the country. The question arises how? So it basically quotes various Nobel economic laureates who has basically said that any government shall actually try to avoid taxing the production itself. But the article is arguing that no, our government is taxing the production in the form of the prices which they pay for electricity. And how they do so? By the firms paying for electricity that is almost twice the cost of supply. So let's try to understand how this term twice the cost of supply is actually derived. So for example, let's say if the cost of production of electricity is 1 rupees, the article is arguing that these firms, commercial, industrial firms, they are basically paying 2 rupees per unit. So how they are basically paying such high high kind of rupees in comparison to the kind of the supply which they are taking? The first argument is the inefficiency which actually prevails in the power distribution sector itself. So for example, these various distribution companies, so there are Gencos, the power generation companies, and then there are Discoms, the power distribution companies. These power distribution companies basically follow the epithet of profit maximization. For example, let's say in every state there is one large Discom. What this one large Discom does to actually kind of supply the power, they create transformers. And one such transformers is created to actually cover kind of large area, specifically in the rural areas, peri-urban areas. So obviously, when the kind of the distance from the source of supply will increase, it's very obvious that the cost to actually supply that power, that is also going to increase. Why? Because of the various transmission and the distribution losses which can incur. Further, to actually profit maximize, these particular discoms, they do not invest on technology upgradation, such as for example adoption of various new kinds of carbon fiber wires, which is being implemented by China. So what leads to that? That basically leads to kind of the dysfunctioning of these transformers, or for example that ultimately lead to the kind of the poor maintenance of the transformers which takes place at the grassroots level. All of these issues ultimately leads to what? Transmission and distribution losses by these distribution companies. As per Niti Aayog, the transmission and distribution losses of these discom exist at around 15 to 20% of the total energy supply per annum. If we refer to the developed economies like USA, the TDL, transmission and distribution loss, exists at only 8 to 9%. Thus, they are almost losing 4 rupees per unit of supply, which ultimately leads to what? Huge outstanding dues. As of April 2025, these discoms, they have incurred almost into the tune of $8.5 billion of dues, which they are basically amounted to pay to the generation companies. So why the generation companies will give the power to the supply to these power distribution companies? And that will lead to what? The kind of the further disruption of the electricity supply, through which you guys are watching this lecture itself. Thus, such consistent power supply is kind of a backbone for our country's economic growth. Thus, the government intervenes. Government says, okay, no problem. Whatever the kind of the dues which are owned by these distribution companies, we are going to pay for that. But when the government is promising that, that basically dent our fiscal policy itself. So for example, in the budget 2025, the government said that we are going to bring down our fiscal deficit to 4.5% of the GDP by the year of 2026. Don't you think if it is going to pay such huge dues, which is owned by this power distribution company, that will basically dent our fiscal policy? The second major issue in the line of the argument that these firms are paying for electricity that is twice the cost of supply is the policy of cross subsidization, where the industrial and commercial establishments actually end up paying for the subsidies which is actually given to the agriculture sector, to the farmers, because they are basically the backbone for the food security of the country. So whatever electricity they are using for irrigation purposes or for, let's example, harvesting purposes, the government says no, we'll provide you subsidized electricity. As well as to various domestic consumer, the various kind of populist policies which are being adopted by the state government, because electricity falls in the state list. So to win the election, right, vote based politics, various state governments are giving freebies, or the Ravi culture as it was termed by the Prime Minister. So because of that, if the customers are paying subsidized fees, all of that is actually being incurred by kind of an extra tax on the industrial and the commercial establishment. The article argues that how the burden of this subsidy falls disproportionately on the shoulder of small and micro enterprises. Because if it is a large firm, let's say for example Ambani or Adani, so obviously they will have their own captive power generating capacity, or they might have installed huge renewable energy plants altogether. So obviously the burden of subsidy is disproportionately on whom? Small and micro enterprises. So article suggests that if we eliminate these subsidies which are being charged from these commercial and industrial establishment, that will lead to decline of the input cost. It will increase formal sector jobs, specifically in the labor intensive sector, and it will increase also the competitiveness of Indian industry. Just look at the share in the electricity subsidy, how for agriculture it has significantly declined from being 72% in 2015 to almost 53%, while for domestic consumer, because of these freebies which are being given to them, it has increased to almost 47% in 2024. At the same time, when we are giving this freebie, let's say for example to almost all the residents of Delhi, how we will actually kind of differentiate that who is rich, who is not required such subsidy at all? So for example, a good share of electricity subsidy actually goes to the rich people, 69% to the middle class, and almost 14% to the rich people. That is another problem which is highlighted by today's editorial. Then the government, to solve this issue of the dues which were being incurred by this power distribution company, the government came up with Ujjwal Discom Assurance Scheme, UDAY scheme. The government said we are going to provide for financial turnaround and revival of the power distribution companies, DISCOM, by ensuring a sustainable permanent solution to the problem. by making all discom profitable. That was the idea. But we can already see that the kind of the dues which they still need to pay to the generation companies. The premise was that the state responsibility to ensure that discom become financially viable. For that, the discoms can convert their debt into state bond, and the central and the state government will pay almost 75% of the dues which they owe. But the Uday scheme also had problem, because electricity is not a central subject first of all. So what if a state does not agree to pay their share, which happened in most of the cases? Then finding buyers for such bonds can actually prove difficult. Not laying down any kind of performance monitoring scheme for these discom after the Uday scheme. Then the states were have to provide subsidized funding. So it caused basically kind of a huge exchequer on their fiscal health. And ultimately did not cover the inadequate investment which this discom has made in network and poor supply. So the issue continued. The article suggests that how, following the line of China, India shall also emphasize on green strategy, or basically greenifying our energy sector, for which the government has already launched national biofuel policy, which we were discussing recently, under which we have achieved the ethanol blending target in petrol of 20% by 2025. By doing that, we have actually saved 1.26 lakh crore in the foreign exchange and reduced our carbon dioxide emission by almost 643 lakh million metric ton. Then the government has brought Satat initiative for compressed biogas blending and 100 CBG plants which we need to create by 2028. The government has launched a green hydrogen mission, under which we are targeting to produce 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by 2030. For solar energy impetus, just like following the line of China, the government has brought various schemes. For example, kind of the solar electrification of the agricultural pumps in rural areas. The government has brought Pradhan Mantri Kusum Yojana. 100% FDI has been allowed in the solar power parks. Further, International Solar Alliance has been signed by India to actually create solar energy and create power transmission lines across the country. And yes, the question which appeared in your prelims paper 2025, Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Yojana, to actually create or provide free electricity up to 300 units every month to 1 crore household. By doing what? By they can actually avail subsidy through national portal, and for that they can actually install the solar photovoltaic panels across on their rooftop. So to actually kind of provide electricity supply to their houses through the source of renewable energy. Also in the context of biofuel, we have also signed Global Biofuel Alliance as well. That is basically leading to the kind of the increase use of biofuel adoption. So all of this will eventually lead to the greenifying of our India's energy sector, and to achieve what? The Panch Amrit target which we have set for ourselves. The question which appeared in your mains 2025 as well. To actually bring our non-fossil fuel energy capacity to 50% or 500 gigawatt by 2030. So our 50% of installed capacity will become from the renewable energy. And in this process will cut down carbon emission by 1 billion ton. And to actually bring our carbon intensity of economy by more than 45%, will reduce it down, and ultimately to become a carbon neutral country by the year of 2070. These were basically the one-page content for your mains question which was appeared in your GS3 paper. So keep all of this in your mind. Try to attempt this particular question and we move forward to the next news, where the article talks about the suspension of import duty which has been done by the government of India, specifically on the cotton. So, what is the context of the news? The article suggests that cotton, which is basically the main raw material for the textile industry, and it is actually grown by nearly 6 million farmers of our country. So, agriculture sector, which is basically the largest employer in our country, employing 46% of our total workforce, 6 million farmers out of them actually grow cotton. In the wake of declining production in our country, the central government has withdrawn the 11% import duty which was introduced in the budget 2021. However, the last year it actually saw a steep increase in the cotton import, even with the duty in the place. So basically when our cotton production is declining, and we need to basically sustain our textile industry as well to supply the raw material to them. So even when the import duty was in the place, there was a huge import of cotton which was taking place. So just look at the declining export from our country of the cotton, and just look at the rising import of cotton which took place. So on August 18, the government said it is going to withdraw the cotton import duty till September 30, when the current cotton season is going to end. Right? So the idea is cotton import duty was first announced in the budget of 2021. At that time, our cotton import production, the cotton production which we are doing in our country, was around 335 lakh bale versus the requirement was of 330 lakh bales approximately. Thus, the government exempted this import duty in 2022 due to the raw material shortage for textile industry, but then again applied it. If we refer to the data which has been provided to us by the Global Trade Research Initiative, despite this cotton import duty being in the place, the cotton import surged by 107%, amounting to $1.2 billion of import in the fiscal year of 2024. So a question which shall arise in your mind is that why? Why India, which is one of the largest producer of cotton in the world, why suddenly we became so much import reliant on cotton? So to understand that, let's first try to have a look at the cotton as a crop and its status of production in our country. So cotton is first and foremost a kharif crop which is majorly grown in hot and sunny climate, and it requires an annual rainfall of around 50 to 100 centimeter annually. It also requires long frost-free period up to almost 210 days. And the most suitable soil for the cultivation of the crop of cotton is actually black soil, but it also grows in the various other kind of soil like for example alluvial, laterite soil, etc. If we refer to the status of cotton production in our country, India is the only country which grows all four types of cotton in the world, which is Asian, Egyptian, American and Sea Island, consisting for almost 18% of the world's total production. And remember, India has the largest area under the cotton cultivation, that is almost 25% or 1/4 of the world's total area under cotton cultivation. If we refer to our share in the world's cotton export, that is abysmally low at almost 5% or 2.7 lakh bales. And the kind of export which we do from cotton, its share in India's total export is only 1.25%. So just look the state share in the country's total cotton production. The largest which comes from Gujarat, closely followed by Maharashtra. The third is your Telangana with 21%. Then there are states like Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka who also produce significant amount of cotton. The question arises is that what is the issue? Why the cotton production in our country has significantly declined, making our country import reliant? The first and foremost, there is supply side issue. So the farmers who grow this cotton, specifically in the region of Gujarat and Maharashtra, they are overtly dependent on monsoonal rainfall, almost 67% of the farmers. Thus, it also makes them kind of vulnerable to the kind of climate change which is taking place and thus extreme weather events which are taking place. For example, there is kind of large scale rainfall which is taking place in a very short duration of time, or the events of cloudburst or flash flood. So to understand that, let's take a case study of Marathwada region, which basically showcased, published in the Hindu, that how in the month of August, where there is a critical period for crop growth actually, the frequency of days where there is a rainfall of more than 3 mm, which is actually quite ideal for the growth of cotton, that dropped by 30%. However, in the month of September, when the crop actually reaches to the harvest, there were 18% more rainy days. So these are basically the kind of the climate vagaries which are taking place. And this overtly dependent on monsoonal rainfall is because of the reason that there exists inadequate irrigation infrastructure in our country. Further, the soil fertility has declined as well. Why? Because of the large scale dependence on various kind of pesticides, fertilizers, as well as the kind of the monocropping culture which has prevailed in our country for a very long period of time. All that has led to declining soil fertility. So the yield of the crop per hectare, that is declining as well. Further, the crop is actually impacted by the pink bollworm. Farmers say the damage by this pink bollworm, which has actually become resistant to various kind of insecticide, is actually worse than American bollworm, for which the BT cotton hybrid was actually created at the first place. All of this has ultimately led to what? The declining area under the cotton cultivation. So for example, in the year of 2023, the area under cotton cultivation was approximately 130 lakh hectare. But in the year of 2024, it has declined to 124 lakh hectare. Then there exists production side issue. Why? because most of the industries which kind of take this cotton as a raw material, kind of further modify it for the, let's say for example, the various industries, they are majorly small scale industry, so less mechanization prevails there. Also, with all of these issues, don't you think that there will be rising cost of raw material? So there is already less profit margins for these small scale industries, so they are basically diverting to other profitable ventures. Third is the limited market access. So for example, in the larger global economy, the kind of cotton, the type of cotton which is more desired is the long staple cotton. But the kind of production of this long staple cotton as a share of the total cotton production in our country is only 1 to 2%. India majorly grows this hybrid cotton, which is not that much in demand in the global market. So that is also one of the reasons. And all of that has translated to what? The overall domestic cotton production in our country has come down to 294 lakh bales, which, keep this in mind, is lowest in the last 15 years. And that is against the requirement by our own industry of 318 lakh bale. Also, there is an estimation that the cotton season which prevails from October to the next year September, that is estimated to be nearly 20 lakh bale lesser than the last cotton season. So the government has put the import duty to actually kind of provide the raw material for our industries, but that has not worked. So what are the steps which the government has taken? First and foremost, to actually kind of tackle the American bollworm, the government had bought this genetically modified BT cotton crop. So that has basically kind of sustained the crop from various kind of pests attacks, at least not against the pink bollworm yet. The second is the government is actually trying to do the technology upgradation specifically in the small and micro enterprises. So for that, the government is providing various kind of incentives, subsidies on electricity, as we were discussing. Third, Samarth scheme, to actually kind of skill the traditional artisans which are employed in the textile sector, to actually provide them skill to create more value added products for the larger global market. As the demand for product will increase, the cotton production will also increase because it will become profitable. Then the government is creating 7 mega integrated textile parks under the MITR scheme, and to kind of do the social engineering so that the Indian should buy more Indian cotton products, the government has brought My Handloom, My Pride initiative as well. The article today suggests certain long-term solutions, such as for example stable policy, so the industry can plan for raw material procurement. The industries which are basically in the textile field, they are demanding 2 major things from the government. They are saying, first of all, suspend the duty every year during the non-peak season, that is April to September, as the farmers would have sold the majority of their produce by then. Second, provide us 5% of interest subvention for working capital that the textile mills actually need to purchase the cotton during the peak season. So these are 2 innovative suggestions which the government shall take into consideration and provide them. So to keep all of this issue related to cotton industry in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about a new statutory body which is in the news today, and that is the National Designated Authority, which now has got the charge to create a carbon market in our country. So what is the context? The context is that the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has actually announced creation of a National Designated Authority. Creation of such National Designated Authority was already mandated by the provisions of 2015 Paris Agreement under a specific article, that is Article 6, which actually provides for the avenues to create climate financing. What is this issue of climate financing? Let's first try to understand that. So let's say for example, there are certain small island nations like Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, etc. They are saying that these developed nations, like for example, let's say USA, you guys have emitted so much of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which is basically trapping the outward radiation from the earth and thus warming the surface as well as, let's say for example, the sea surface. So because of the warming of sea surface temperature, thermal expansion is taking place and the sea surface is rising. Because of that, our island nations are actually going to get submerged under this ocean water. So you guys owe us a historical responsibility, and thus you should provide us certain finance for climate adaptation. So that is basically the idea of climate financing under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. You guys will ask another question. That can be, what is this Paris Agreement first of all? This Paris Agreement was adopted in Conference of Parties 21. Again, another question, what is Conference of Parties? So Conference of Parties are basically where the various countries actually meet under the ambit of United Nations Framework on Climate Change, which came into the force in the year of 1992 through the Rio Earth Summit, which is basically a kind of a multinational treaty. Almost 197 parties it has currently. India is one of the original founder as well as signatory to this United Nations Framework on Climate Change. So when the kind of the 21st meeting, Conference of Parties, was actually taking place, from there emerged an idea. The idea was termed as Paris Agreement, which basically said that we need to curb down the global warming which is taking place ideally to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100 C, and we shall actually put more efforts, all the developed nations and developing nations, to bring it down to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100 C or the end of this century. However, keep this in mind that if we refer to the 6th assessment report published by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it says that how the world has already gone 1.4 degrees Celsius more warmer than the pre-industrial level. So we are almost about to breach the Paris Agreement target. This Article 6 of Paris Agreement and this idea of National Designated Authority. So for the first time to create such authority under Paris Agreement, that was passed at the 29th edition of Climate COP, which took place recently in Baku, Azerbaijan in November 2024. What this National Designated Authority will do? It will actually enable a carbon emission trading regime. It will be a 21-member committee which will be headed by the Secretary of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and will have representative from Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Finance, etc. It will ultimately recommend the list of activities which will be ultimately considered for trading of emission reduction units from the projects. And it will help our country to achieve what? Our Panch Amrit target or nationally determined contribution target, which were revised in the Glasgow Summit, a kind of a question which appeared in this year, May 2025. So what all happened in this COP29 of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change? First and foremost, all the countries basically said that, okay, we are going to submit a report card to the headmaster. Who is the headmaster? UNFCCC. That okay, these are the efforts which we have taken to curb down our greenhouse gas emission or carbon dioxide emission. That is called as Global Stocktake Text, a kind of a periodic review mechanism under the Paris Agreement. So for example, the first such stocktake report was published in the year of 2023, even by our country as well, that these are the efforts which we have taken, and the second report will be submitted in the year of 2028. With a target which has been set for all the country that they should triple their renewable energy capacity by the year of 2030 to actually achieve what? The target of net zero by 2050 and thus transitioning away from the fossil fuels. Also, there was a global goal on adaptation which took place to double the adaptation finance for the developing countries. However, this initiative particularly failed in the COP29. Why? Because the developing nation, small island nations, including our country, we were demanding that if you want to mobilize, right, to adopt more renewable energy, to actually become, let's say for example, net zero emission country. So India has set for ourselves that will become net zero by 2070. China is saying it will become net zero by 2060. To do that, we said that, you know what, we will need a finance mobilization of $1.3 trillion every year by 2035 to meet our Paris Agreement target. The developed economies who are historically responsible for greenhouse gas emission, they said that okay, we can only offer $300 billion per year. Even though of the current carbon budget, the total carbon dioxide emission, 82% actually comes from global north. The kind of the estimation which was put by UNCTAD, it said that there will be requirement of $500 billion by 2025 by these developed nations to actually, achieve their target of Paris Agreement. One more thing was done, that was creation of loss and damage fund to provide compensation to the countries which are affected by the climate change. So for example, the countries which are getting affected by the sea surface temperature rise. In our country, there already exists a carbon market in the form of carbon credit trading scheme, which the government has brought into the force under Energy Conservation Act of 2022, following the directive of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement 2015, which is actually enforced by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, where it says that I will provide a carbon credit certificate for reduction of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. What is this phenomena of carbon market? Let's try to understand this now. So let's say there are two companies. Hypothetically, let's say one company is Ambani and other company is Adani. What Adani did? So let's say, for example, Bureau of Energy Efficiency set a kind of a allocated greenhouse gas emission unit. So it said that, okay, Adani, you can emit 100 tons of CO2 this year. But Adani put a lot of impetus on solar energy, Surya Ghar panel Yojana, let's say for example Pradhan Mantri Kusum Yojana. So it applied all of that, and thus result of it, it kind of emitted only 80 tons of CO2 that year. So in this way, it has reduced the greenhouse gas emission and has an additional 20 tons of CO2. That is basically called as offset credit. However, in comparison to that, what Ambani did, it did not apply all of this renewable energy initiative and ended up producing 120 ton of CO2. So it has 20 ton extra. What this Ambani can do, that it can basically purchase this offset credit in auction and sale by a mutual agreement in a market which takes place, and that is the carbon market. So the Bureau of Energy Efficiency says that, okay, we are going to penalize you, Ambani, unless and until you end up doing what? Buying this offset credit by the company of Adani. So basically, this carbon market actually act as a kind of an incentive for the companies who are basically kind of adopting more green energy policies. And this is actually regulated, this trading activity is regulated by the Central Electric Regulatory Commission, CERC. So remember this, National Designated Authority, remember CERC, the function of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, this carbon credit certificate which amounts to 1 ton of CO2. And we move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn about a new initiative which the government is implementing for the grassroots level development of the tribal people, and that is called as Adi Karmayogi Initiative. So before that, a small snapshot of tribes in India, which could have become your introduction in the mains answer this year. So first of all, there is no such definition, official definition for scheduled tribes in our country. The Article 342 of the Constitution only state that such scheduled tribes shall be notified by the President of India. However, as recommended by the Deepen Commission 1960, there are certain general criteria which we take into the consideration. Like for example, the diversity of language of these tribes, the distinct social and cultural organization which they have established, the kind of economic underdevelopment which they are facing, and geographical isolation. So if we refer to the data of census 2011, the number of scheduled tribes in our country currently are 705, and the numbers of particularly vulnerable tribal groups are around 75. As per census 2011, their population was around 10.4 crore or 8.6% of total population. And 89% or almost 90% of these people, these tribes, actually lived in the rural areas with literacy rate as low as 58%, and among the tribal women it was around 49%. The context of the news today is that the government is saying that we are lighting candles, role play, cognitive group task, and knot tying and fish bowl exercises are being conducted at the core of efforts to create a cadre of 20 lakh change leaders for the tribal villages under this Adi Karmayogi Initiative of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. This Adi Karmayogi is being implemented under the larger objective of Dharti Aba Janjati Gram Utkarsh Abhiyan. What is the aim and objective of it? First, these tribal villages, these rural hamlets, they are going to create their own village vision document for 2030 for 1 lakh target village across 550 districts. Then 1 lakh Adi Seva Kendras will be created, where, let's say for example, there is a tribal farmer who is eligible under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, or there is a woman who can be included under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So all of these schemes will be availed to these tribal people through this one-stop center which is called as Adi Seva Kendra to access all the welfare schemes of the government. Then how it will be helping to create grassroots leadership in tribal areas. So government is empowering the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers, the Panchayati Raj institution members, as well as self-help group leaders there. The civil society organizations, which also appeared in the May 2025, they are being enrolled, and various volunteer workers, Sahyogis, are being enrolled. They will basically act as field facilitators and mentors for community engagement. So what we are doing, we are basically asking for their grievances. If any innovation which they have done, any kind of traditional practice which they follow, which is innovative, let's say any agriculture practice, and a real-time documentation of all of this is being done, and a community feedback is being taken for the implementation of the scheme. Then to further enhance the community engagement, a fish bowl exercise is being conducted. So for example, all the tribal people are told to actually imagine that they are basically fishes in a bowl. So they basically start interacting with each other, sharing grievances, innovative practices which can be implemented by the government. The idea is that there are various steps which the government has taken. So if this particular question, if you guys were appearing in the mains 2025 and you were attending this question, this particular section could have become your conclusion or way forward, where you could have talked about the various initiatives which the government has taken for tribal development in our country, such as, for example, creating Adi Adarsh Gram Yojana under the idea of Pradhan Mantri Janman, Janjati Adivasi Nyay Mahabhiyan, to provide them Pakka Ghar, right, under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Har Ghar Nal Se Jal under your Jal Shakti Abhiyan, Gaon Gaon Tak Sadak under your Gram Sadak Yojana, Har Ghar Bijli under your Saubhagya scheme. So basically Pradhan Mantri Janman is basically the integration of the various schemes of the government to create One Dhan Vikas Kendra under Janjati Vikas Mission. Then to further promote the products which are being created by the tribals, the government has launched Adi Mahotsav by TriFed. To actually promote the healthcare in the women, the government in budget 2023 launched a mission to eliminate sickle cell anemia by 2047. And further, for the education of these tribal people, the government has brought Eklavya Residential Model School. So remember all of these schemes, keep them dear to you, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to have a quick overlook at the two new frigates which has been launched by the Indian Navy. So two new Nilgiri class stealth guided missile frigates called as INS Udaygiri and INS Himgiri were simultaneously commissioned into the Indian Navy in Visakhapatnam. These futuristic, sleek and stealthy electronic warfare capable vessels carry a formidable arsenal, as per our defense minister, who said that how it basically gives a message that India is fully capable of protecting its maritime borders and is ready to respond immediately to any kind of challenge or situation. Remember, these Nilgiri class of stealth frigate ships are actually being created under the larger Project 17A, where such ships are being constructed by two major shipbuilding companies, indigenous companies, who are GRSE or Garden Reach Shipbuilders and Engineers, Kolkata based, and MDL or Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited in Mumbai. The Project 17 Alpha has been further updated by the government, under which it was created in 2015 to construct warships and frigates for the Indian Navy, which involves the development of 7 advanced guided missile frigates. 7 advanced missile guided frigates, the names of them are Nilgiri, Taragiri, Mahendragiri, Dunagiri and Vindhyagiri, and ultimately the Udaygiri and Himgiri as well. So just remember the name of them. They can appear in the prelims and UPSC can ask that in what these basically terms stands for. Okay. Now, some specific data which you need to remember about these ships. Remember that they are powered by combined diesel or gas propulsion plants using diesel engines and gas turbines, and they are managed through an integrated platform management system called as IPMS. These ships are fitted with a supersonic surface-to-surface missile or long-range surface-to-air missiles as well. They also contains BrahMos supersonic cruise missile and an anti-submarine torpedo as well. A simple question to all of you is very interesting. Let's say who can answer this. What is one very classic and basic difference between a ballistic missile and a cruise missile? So the point is that these ships, they are very much capable to actually operate in the blue water environment, in the far-flung sea region, right? So they have air defense capability as well. They are actually designed to counter the threat of enemy's aircraft and anti-ship cruise missiles as well. For example, even if they are launched around the vertical launch, because they contain a long surface to air missile as well. So they can basically fight anti-surface, anti-air and anti-submarine warfare. They also contains your Barak 8 anti-aircraft missile and Shakti electronic warfare suite as well. Remember that all of these inclusions is actually further going to strengthen the Indian Navy, which safeguards our maritime borders. So as per your NCERT, our maritime boundary basically extends up to 7,516.6 km, and we share our Navy's boundary to 7 countries, with the motto of Navy being Sham No Varuna. And who is considered to be the supreme commander of all the military forces which we have, and that is President. The Indian Navy celebrates its day annually on 4th of December. The reason for that is that it was this day on which the first successful anti-ship missile was actually used by the Indian Navy in the backdrop of Indo-Pakistan war, which was taking place in the year of 1971 for the liberation of Bangladesh. And that particular mission is termed as Operation Trident 1971. Then there are two important projects besides 17A. One is Project 15B to create guided missile destroyers, and Project 75 to create diesel electric attack submarines and not these naval ships. And these naval ships has also been kind of inspired by various other ships of the other countries. So remember all of these details, answer in the comment box, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are going to read about as the US has confirmed the first human case of a flesh-eating New World Screwworm. So remember, pay attention on this term screwworm. That will help you to understand about this particular flies as well. What is the context? So US has confirmed this first human case of flesh-eating New World Screwworm. What is this screwworm? First and foremost, try to understand that these screwworms are basically the type of blue-gray blowfly which are basically found in the South America and Caribbean. They are basically caused by the parasitic infection of fly larvae. And if you get actually infested by these larvae, it is extremely painful and can also lead to high mortality rate if it is left untreated. Remember that US actually eradicated such New World screwworms first back in the year of 1966 by applying a technique called as sterile insect technique. To understand that, we need to kind of understand the functioning of these screwworms. Screwworms, which are basically parasites. So what they do, let's say for example, you suffered from a wound. Now in this wound, a female screwworm will start laying eggs in the open wounds or the nasal cavity in the warm-blooded animals, like for example warm-blooded mammals like us. Now in this particular wound, this female screwworm, she will end up laying almost 300 eggs at a time or 3000 eggs during their small lifespan which they have of 10 to 30 days. These eggs which has been laid by this female screwworm, it will basically hatch into larvae which are called as maggots. And these maggots will start developing or further burrowing into the wound itself using the sharp mouth hook which they have, and that's why they are termed as screwworms. Ultimately, these maggots feeds on the living flesh of a warm-blooded mammal, and then they fall into the ground and they burrow themselves into the soil after having the efficient nutrition which they were required, and thus they emerge into an adult screwworm flies. So what US did back then, it basically kind of used a sterile insect technique under which it basically created so much insect and left them into the open. The idea was that if these female screwworms will mate with these insects, they will be unable to produce more such eggs and they will basically die within the limited lifespan which they have. However, the disease has again emerged in the USA. So keep this particular interesting concept in your mind, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.